Your hormones do not get balanced. They respond. That's really the difference. They respond to the inputs that your endocrine system is receiving, right? And they respond to these signals that your body's receiving every day, whether you are nourished enough, whether you're stressed, whether you're exposed to inflammation, whether you're depleted, whether you're supported, whether you're rested. This is how the endocrine system is being stimulated. And your hormones are the output of all of those inputs. If you've been listening to the show, you know I don't believe in one-size-fits-all solutions because your body isn't one-size-fits-all. That's why we created Flow Living, to support your hormones with both targeted supplements and the cycle syncing methodology. It's about giving your body what it needs when it needs it so you can feel more balanced, more energized, and more like yourself throughout the month. If you're ready to try it, you can get 25% off with the code podcast25 at flowliving.com. Welcome back to the show. I'm so happy to see you back inside the Ovary Club, where we all belong. Before we get into today's episode, if you're not already following the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if this show is helping you to better understand your hormones and your body and your cycle, I would be so grateful if you would leave a review so that other women can find the show and figure out how to start taking care of their hormones better, because all of us deserve the right information and a better conversation around our hormonal health than the one we've been given. All right. So I wanted to talk today about one of the most overused and misunderstood phrases that is out there in the wellness world. And that is the one where we say, balance your hormones. You hear it everywhere. It's on social media, it's on wellness marketing, it's on podcasts, it's in supplement ads. It sounds like a good idea. It sounds smart. It sounds like it's the goal. But here's the problem. Your hormones do not get balanced. They respond. That's really the difference. They respond to the inputs that your endocrine system is receiving, right? And they respond to these signals that your body's receiving every day. Whether you are nourished enough, whether you're stressed, whether you're exposed to inflammation, whether you're depleted, whether you're supported, whether you're rested. This is how the endocrine system is being stimulated. And your hormones are the output of all of those inputs. And this is not a new idea for me, because back in 2013, I published a groundbreaking book at the time called WomanCode. In that book, I laid out the protocol that I had been using in my clinical practice for a decade. It's also the same protocol that I used to recover from my own journey with polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it was really based on the fact that we were ignoring this very simple truth in women's health at the time, which is that hormones are these outputs. And the goal is not to triage the outputs. The goal is to really manage those inputs to support the endocrine system. And if we support the endocrine system in the right way and in the right sequence, then those hormonal outputs take care of themselves. But back then, in the 2000s, the wellness world was obsessed with candida and detoxing and juice cleanses and elimination diets and cabbage soup diets, and really only drinking water with maple syrup and cayenne pepper in it, and really interesting things that were really stressing the body or resetting the body, this idea of resetting. But what I was seeing in my practice at the time is that these were really problematic from a hormonal perspective. These extreme things that people were doing, the cleanses, the juices, all of that, this was really adding to the hormonal dysregulation that women were already experiencing. There was also this trend of training for a triathlon to get yourself back in shape. And that was also further dysregulating women because they were training at various stages of their cycle and not managing their food. And it was really messing with their hormones. Women were having more irregular cycles. They were having lower energy. They were gaining weight. They were breaking out. Their PMS was worse. I mean, the relationship with food and exercise also became more toxic, right? We were being told that if we just tried harder, pushed harder, restricted more, then everything would magically get better. And it wasn't true then, and it's definitely not true now, even more so. So today I want to take the conversation back to the source and walk you through what I've been teaching for the past 20 years with the FLO Protocol. It was the foundation for my own healing. It was the foundation for the WomanCode book, which is still a bestseller today. And it was the foundation for not only my clinical practice, but also the FLO Living company that I built, which was all this idea of like, how do we have the tools and the platform to really support what our bodies need from an input perspective? I'm going to explain why this balancing your hormones concept is the wrong framework, what your hormones actually need. And I'm going to go through these 5 steps of the FLO Protocol that really help your endocrine system do its job for you of balancing your hormones, but completely from a different perspective. Before we get into those steps, I want to clear up the sort of this framework of why you should stop trying to balance your hormones. Because if you don't understand that part, then I think you're going to keep chasing solutions that don't solve the problem. And I want you to be a savvy consumer and do things that really move the needle for you. So here are the 5 things that I wish every woman knew about why balancing your hormones is BS. So first, hormones are outputs, not the starting point. So when you think that something is going on hormonally, right? The instinct is to blame estrogen or progesterone or cortisol. But, that's taking things a little out of context, right? Your hormones are part of an ecosystem. They're not acting independently. They're interconnected. They're responding to instructions from your brain and your endocrine system. And they're responding to all sorts of things that you're taking in dietarily and lifestyle-wise. So your brain is constantly assessing, the internal environment, right? Do we have enough nutrients? Do we have enough glucose? Is there a lot of stress happening? Are there enough resources to reproduce, right? And based on those answers, your brain is going to signal to your ovaries to either move forward with ovulation or maybe to hold back, right? And that's when ovulation becomes inconsistent. That's when we start to see changes in estrogen and progesterone, or your cycle starts to feel irregular, or you have PMS, right? It's not that yes, on the one hand, you could say, well, my progesterone is low and that's why I'm having PMS, but that's like the tip of the iceberg. And I want you to look underneath the surface of the water as to how did you end up with that low level of progesterone in the first place? And that's that bigger conversation about what have you done to dysregulate the endocrine system? How have you mismanaged your inputs? Because your body can't keep your progesterone where it should be. That's your endocrine system's job, not yours, right? Your only tools when your hormones are off in terms of where they should be from a measurement perspective is to either add exogenous hormones or to suffer, right? You don't want to put yourself in that between a rock and a hard place. Now, sometimes you do need to add exogenous hormones, but for the most part, and this has been my work for the past 30 years, and I just published a study about this with cycle syncing and PMS, is that if you shift your inputs, and your endocrine system starts shifting those hormonal outputs. And that's really the key. I want you to stop seeing your body as broken, and I want you to see this system as a very intelligent and responsive hormonal ecosystem that you get to interact with for good or for bad, depending on what you're doing. Okay, So let's talk a little bit more. The second thing I want you to know about is that your endocrine system is responding to these inputs constantly and in real time. So it's not just acting on one isolated factor. Your endocrine system takes in data from your entire lifestyle, and that plays a role in how well it can produce hormones as an output. So it's paying attention to how often you're eating. Are you eating enough carbohydrates? Not enough carbohydrates? Are you eating frequently enough? Are you skipping meals? Are you going too long between meals? Are you sleeping enough? Are you being awoken in the middle of the night? Are you not getting deep enough sleep? Here's a fun fact. Just doubling the amount of deep sleep that you get per night from, let's say, 20 minutes to 40 minutes can dramatically, within 2 cycles, increase your progesterone levels, right? So there's a reason to track your sleep, but it's also a reason to make sure you get a really good sleep routine in place so you can be making hormones. This is a great correlation between an input that you might not associate with your hormones, like progesterone, right? So you could say to yourself, well, my progesterone's low, I should take a progesterone replacement medication. You could do that. You could also see that as like your last resort, because the other thing you could do first is change those dietary and lifestyle inputs. You could take some B vitamins to help produce more progesterone, and you could dial in that sleep routine, and within 2 cycles have the progesterone levels that you should. So that's really a key factor. Stress is another key factor. And we get so much stress that we don't even realize we're doing to ourselves by skipping meals, by not sleeping enough, by overcommitting at different phases of the cycle to being out and about when we should be in and resting. That always on lifestyle is really bad for our endocrine system. Why? Because our endocrine system requires some of those circadian hormonal patterns to help us make some of our steroid hormones, right? So you need to rest, you need to make melatonin in order for you to protect ovulation and protect your ovarian health. So if your life is chaotic, if you're always on, if you're like, oh, I'll figure out food at the last minute. If you're kind of never giving yourself that foundation of those nourishing, supportive habits, your hormones are going to be affected by that for sure. The third thing I think that is a problem with this whole concept of balancing hormones is that it really creates the wrong goal. I know we're splitting hairs here because you say, well, Lisa, I want my hormones to be balanced. I want that too. But I want you to focus instead of I want to perfect my hormone levels. I want you to focus on, I want to manage my dietary and lifestyle inputs as best as I can each and every day. If that's your goal, you're going to have a 90% better chance than somebody who's not focused on that goal of keeping her hormones balanced. Again, having worked with women for 25 years and doing this for myself for 30 years, my goal is not to balance my hormones. My goal every day is to nourish my female ecosystem as best as I can. And if I get that right, the rest takes care of itself for the most part. And that's another thing, because the other reason why it's the wrong goal is that assumes that your hormones are perfect at some perfect static level. But as you know, as we've talked about many times, the female hormonal ecosystem is dynamic. It's constantly changing. So what is balanced hormones in the luteal phase is very different from what balanced hormones are in the ovulatory phase, et cetera, right? So this idea of chasing some perfect number is very binary, is a little bit more of a masculine perspective. And that's why it is also kind of not the best use of your focal points. Like if you're going to have a goal, I want you to be supporting that rhythmic pulsing of all the hormones that are changing, right? It's not to perfect one static pattern. They're always changing. So we have to focus on that ecosystem, supporting that internal rhythm and all of the components that nourish our endocrine system so that it can do its job. You can't possibly do the complexity of tasks that the endocrine system is doing for you. So just try to give it the right building blocks. And there's 2 more points here that I think really are worth your consideration. I think the other reason why balancing your hormones really isn't the right way to think about things is because it implies that there's some magical fix. Like if you take, and this is really where there's a lot of supplement marketing out there, product marketing, like this is going to balance your hormones. And this is this like, and I see it all the time. I mean, I've been in the space. People call me the OG for a reason. I've been here before everybody else. I've seen all the things emerge in the marketplace. And it really frustrates me still when I see a product and a company going out there with like a single ingredient, low dose saying, this is the daily hormone balancing item that you need. Like, I think, that is just really frustrating because, there are no quick fixes. I have been studying female endocrinology and women's hormones for 30 years. Listen, girlfriend, if there was one thing that I could be taking that would magically fix and keep my hormones balanced, I would be on it. I would be talking about it. I would have written a book about it. I would be selling that product. I would want everybody to know that one magical thing. I am definitely here to tell you that does not exist. It doesn't, because quick fixes ignore the reality that this is an interconnected ecosystem. Your hormones do not function in isolation, and everything is codependent. So you can't fix them directly. You can't take a supplement or do a detox or do something to fix. That whole idea just doesn't really work. Now, and the other thing too is in some cases, like I was saying earlier, they can increase stress, increase dysregulation, destabilize blood sugar. I mean, instead of improving hormonal health, I think sometimes these things can make them worse. So, if you feel like you've been trying everything and buying lots of products and trying what is trending on social media and you're still suffering with hormones and symptoms, then I want you to know that there's a reason for that. And that's kind of why I'm going through these different things for you to consider about why balancing your hormones is we got to update that conversation. So the last thing I'll say is the FLO protocol that I described in the book WomanCode that I published, I think in 2013. This was really built to address the right problem. Like, I don't want you to be balancing your hormones. I want you to support your endocrine system. If you've been newly diagnosed with PCOS, if you have a fibroid, if you have endometriosis, if you have an ovarian cyst, if you are suffering, right? You're not just having garden variety PMS, right? You really need to do this sort of deeper dive that the FLO protocol takes women through. And I want you to focus not on those symptoms and managing those symptoms, but going deeper into supporting that endocrine system. And the protocol was really built on this research that I did, now a long time ago, 25 years ago, really looking at how you can get the endocrine system to reboot itself or to perform more optimally by managing those inputs properly. So that's what the foundations are. I'm going to take you through those next. But I just wanted to go over this because I want you to understand that your hormones are not the problem. They're responding to the inputs that your body's receiving. Your input mismanagement is 9 times out of 10 the main problem. And once you start dialing in those inputs, which I'm going to list out for you now, everything starts to work. And this is why women who have tried everything and they come to FLO Living all of a sudden get results they can't get anywhere else, because we, for me, especially as somebody who suffered from PCOS and who did all sorts of crazy things to try to get myself better until I figured all of this out, I never would want to put any woman through a wild goose chase that they're currently already on. I want to provide you a place where you can learn, that's what FLO Living is, a place where you can learn how to manage your hormones every day. We need that. You go to the gynecologist once a year to check under the hood, make sure everything's good, right? Get your physical, sometimes check labs, oftentimes not. But we need every day in between your annual exam a way to care for our hormones. You can't be passive, and that's what this is all about. So let's go into the 5 foundations of the FLO protocol that's described in WomanCode. If you've ever wanted to ask me your own hormone questions, the Ovary Club Insiders is where you can do that. You'll get access to private podcast episodes where I answer real member questions with clear, science-backed guidance you can actually use. Join us at alisavitti.com/insiders. So let's start with the first thing. When I was looking at, what is it going to take to get my hormonal outputs to correct themselves? Like, what do I need to do first? How does the endocrine system function? The first thing that your endocrine system needs is to have stable blood sugar. If you don't have stable glucose levels throughout the day, you're not going to be able to have healthy hormonal output, right? Because blood sugar and insulin drive hormonal stability. So every time you eat, your body has to regulate glucose, right? And the endocrine system, its first job that's like essential for to stay alive is to make sure that it safeguards the transport of that glucose to the brain, the heart, and the muscle tissue, right? So it does that via insulin, getting the insulin into your cells and making sure that this gets to those critical organ destinations. To be clear, fertility, libido, and your period, your monthly cycle, are not essential for your survival. So if we start to mismanage our blood sugar and the other things I'm going to take you through, your endocrine system is going to start to throttle back, right? Remove these non-essential functions, right? Because it has to prioritize these other things for you to function every day. When you start to have these blood sugar spikes, right, because you're skipping meals, you're having too much sugar at a meal, and then you go for long periods of time between meals, you have these big swings from high blood sugar to low blood sugar. And when that happens, you have sort of this imbalance between insulin and cortisol that starts to affect ovulation and then progesterone production. And when our progesterone is off and our ovulation is off, that's when you're going to start to say, hey, I don't feel like I should. I don't feel like myself. I'm having more symptoms. My period's irregular. What's going on? You'll see mood swings. You'll see bloating. You'll see all these symptoms. And this is actually when you're the most vulnerable to marketing, because you're thinking, maybe I could buy a product for my skin. Maybe I could buy a product for my bloating. Maybe I could buy something for my breast tenderness or my mood swings or my insomnia. But you see, you could spend a lot of money on those things and maybe you'll get some temporary relief. Or you could understand that the first thing you have to do every day is make sure you're really managing your blood sugar stability, right? So you need that consistency. You need breakfast. Women do better with breakfast. But Alisa, I'm not hungry in the morning. You will be once you start healing your metabolism by really managing your blood sugar, right? I wake up ravenous in the morning, right? And I look for that nice glucose exposure through my breakfast. I have 30 grams of protein, 30 grams of carbohydrate, and about 12 to 14 grams of fat, right? In my breakfast meal. You got to fuel your body. And then you have to eat at regular enough intervals for you, which usually in all these years I've been working with women, it's about 3 to 4 hours between meals, which means you're actually more optimally eating 4 meals a day. These don't have to be huge meals, but they are a meal where you're getting about 30 grams of protein per meal and potentially 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrate and depending on your tolerance, 12 to 20 grams of fat per meal, depending on your age and stage. So keeping those consistent blood sugar levels throughout the day is the first most important step. It's foundational. If you get that wrong, you cannot out-biohack that with any quick fix. It's just not going to work. But when you get it right, then everything starts to work the way that it should. But let's keep going down the rabbit hole of the second foundation and how these are interconnected. So the second step of the protocol is balancing cortisol. Why? Cortisol and stress signals deeply affect ovarian function, and have a strong connection to progesterone production, and have a direct tie to these special glial cells that we've now discovered in the ovary, which I'll talk more about in a future episode, that really respond to stress inputs and stress signals. So what does that mean? Your body is going to prioritize survival always over reproduction. And that's just built into your biology. It's just the way it is. Because why? Because 3D printing a human being inside of your own body is such a nutrient demanding process that in order for you to do that, you have to be so well nourished and consistently over time and low stress, right? That you need to have optimal internal environment for that to really take place easily. But when you have chronic elevated levels of cortisol, your endocrine system starts to shift its priority. And it moves energy away from reproduction to survival. And it also has these, vicious cycle interactions with your blood sugar. And again, for example, when blood sugar is low, that's a form of stress. So then cortisol is secreted, and that talks to your stored fat cells and tries to get glucose into the bloodstream to compensate for the fact that you've had a blood sugar drop because you either ate too much sugar recently, or you've gone too long without a meal, or you're fasting, or you're detoxing, or whatever you're doing, or you're working out on an empty stomach, or things like that, right? And the more you do that, which you think about all those little things that you might be doing, you're like, oh, gee, I did all of those things today. I ate too many carbs at one meal. I went 6 hours between lunch and dinner, and I worked out this morning on an empty stomach. I mean, this is one day of a lot of stress that if you do that daily, chronically, a couple times a week, every single day, you're now having a conversation where the ovary is like, we're stressed out, we're not getting enough nutrients, and we can't make enough progesterone to support a pregnancy. We just can't, because we have to make more and more cortisol from these same mother hormones. So I think it's important to understand that sometimes you feel like you're doing all the right things. You're having the juice, you're eating the vegetables, you're taking all the supplements. But if you are mismanaging stress by, some of these things that we can control, like meal timing, sleep schedules, the amount of work that you're doing, then you really could put your body into a stressed state very, very easily. And like I said, when cortisol is elevated, you're going to see things like irregular or missed periods, shorter luteal phases, increased PMS, adrenal fatigue or a sense of burnout, and anxiety, feeling wired but tired, right? And again, this is where you're vulnerable to some of this quick fix marketing, like do a cortisol juice or whatever is happening right now on social media. Like, this is not going to deeply deal with your daily dietary and lifestyle mismanagement. You can't take enough magnesium to deal with your cortisol, right? You might get some short-term relief the first few times you do that, but you're not going to really heal the problem at the root. So you've got to do things like, when I have women go through the FLO protocol and they're on this step, right? We talk about sleep and wake hygiene routines, right? How you're waking up. Are you getting morning sun? Are you looking right at your phone? What are you doing in the morning? Waking up in an adrenalized state where you're like panicking about your to-do list, rushing out the door, skipping meals, having caffeine on an empty stomach like the male biohackers do. Please don't do that. Then how are you going to sleep at night? Are you like doom scrolling until you pass out? How are you managing just that basic, major hormonal signal, right, of your circadian support, and how are you managing your blood sugar throughout the day with all of those other lifestyle habits? Okay, now there's another step, because even if your body is making enough hormones, it also has to break them down and eliminate them. And this is another place where we can start to see challenges, like maybe you're getting your blood sugar management right, and maybe your stress isn't so bad. But if we aren't having the right metabolic process of eliminating hormones, then we can start to see symptoms as well. So this is the third step in the FLO protocol. And this is really around supporting our gut health as it relates to estrogen breakdown, estrogen metabolism. So, and why? Because estrogen metabolism and gut function determine how well your body clears hormones, right? So, like I said, making hormones is only part of the equation. You also have to break them down and get them out of your body. Estrogen, you make it throughout the day. You make it in pulses. You make all your hormones in pulses. You don't like have this steady state of hormones throughout the day. And your liver works to break that down. So there's 3 phases of liver detoxification. It metabolizes these estrogen molecules into what are referred to as estrogen metabolites, right? Broken down forms of these estrogen. Before we learned more about this, we used to think that these estrogen metabolites were inert. They were inactive. They didn't do anything. Once they were broken down, they were no longer stimulating your tissues or your organs. That's not true. In fact, if they remain in circulation, they are very active and can be very problematic as well. So can increase disease risk and other things. So we want to package them up, break them down in the liver, and then we want to get them out. How do we get them out? What is the method? Some come out in the urine, but a lot come out through the bowels. And so diet becomes really essential. Like, what am I specifically talking about here? I'm talking about fiber, both soluble and insoluble, because the metabolites bind with those fiber types, and then you are able to excrete them in your daily bowel movement. Now, you could say to me, Alisa, well, I think my bowels are fine. I go to the bathroom. Let me dive in. Let's click in a little bit there. So I wake up, just so you know what is bowel movement goals? Okay. Like that needs to be its own hashtag. You need to wake up, have a glass of water, like about this full size. Okay. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's like 22 ounces, 24 ounces. I'm not sure. And then you want to brush your teeth, look at your morning sunlight, you're up for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then you want to go. You want to have the urge to go, because hydration is what stimulates peristalsis, the action of the bowels kind of, doing their thing to push out, fecal matter. If you can't have a bowel movement until after caffeine, which is typically what I hear from a lot of women, or even later in the day, it's even worse, then there's some degree of constipation that's taking place. And even if you're going every day, if your bowel movements are not healthy, like you can there's images online, you can look at like, what should your poop look like? It should look a certain way, okay? It shouldn't look like a bunch of little, as my 4-year-old calls them, dinosaur eggs. Like it shouldn't look like little fossilized small things. It shouldn't be mushy. It should be this like glorious golden banana, okay? Sort of kind of pale brown in color, tan, and it should be kind of a nice solid piece that kind of mimics what the interior curvation of your large intestine could look like, right? So if that's happening, great. That means you're eating plenty of plants and fiber to make that possible, and your estrogen metabolism is working well. But having worked with so many women for so long, I'm pretty much guaranteeing that if you're listening to this and you're having hormone symptoms, that this may be an area of vulnerability for you. Just to put it into perspective, I eat about 2 pounds of plant material per day, okay? I cannot tell you how impactful that is on your bowel movements, right? Like it is definitely night and day different when you eat a lot of plant material, because you're getting soluble and insoluble fiber. So this is things like legumes, veggies, cruciferous veggies, all the things that I talk about eating in the cycle syncing method, obviously. Root vegetables, all counts. Fruits, all of that stuff is fiber, right? I also add in sources of fiber like flax and psyllium to add, right? So when you support this detox system, like not only are you helping to have a place for these estrogen metabolites to bind and leave your system, you're also supporting your gut microbiome. And why would you want to do that? Well, inside of your gut microbiome, you have something called the estrobolome. It is a specialized set of gut bacteria that also help deal with these estrogen metabolites. So you want to, it's nice that the same things that help you poop out the estrogen are also the same things that help promote that healthy estrobolome and gut microbial environment, right? So I love something that's like an efficient lever. You don't have to do separate things. You don't have to take special probiotics. Now, if you've been chronically exposed to antibiotics, if you've had something that's disrupted your gut, taking probiotics can be really helpful. I personally, because I was so overexposed to antibiotics as a kid, like ear infections every day, strep throat all the time, like to the point where I had to have my tonsils removed at 7. That's how much strep throat I was having consistently. I had a lot of antibiotic exposure as a kid. I like taking probiotics now, and I do that daily, and it's part of my regimen. But it doesn't have to be if you're getting your fiber intake right and you're managing this. So that is another internal system that goes a long way in helping you reduce negative hormonal symptoms and promoting an overall sense of hormonal balance. It's you taking care of your estrogen metabolism support really helps your body keep your hormones balanced on your behalf, right? Okay. The fourth step in the protocol, in the FLO protocol, is the cycle syncing method. Of course, once you address these circadian hormones, these sort of the insulin, the cortisol, which happen to be on a circadian cycle, and you're helping your body flush things out through your waste management system, then you want to be addressing your infradian rhythm, right? Because that is another core foundational piece of your endocrine system getting the support it needs so it can balance your cycle hormones. Now, we just did a study on the cycle syncing method. I'm very proud to have done that. It's the first official cycle syncing study ever done. We published the results in February 2026. You can download the white paper and read it for yourself on the FLO Living website. But the long story short is, the cycle syncing method is a very powerful and effective tool in reducing PMS. It reduced PMS symptoms by almost 90% in 92% of study participants in under 3 months. So if you want to really eliminate any reason for your body to have, this sort of like situation where it finds itself making you have more PMS symptoms, cycle syncing is the thing that really supports our hormonal rhythm by aligning your self-care routine with your cycle phases. That's really the thing. So just to recap, if this is the first time you're hearing about cycle syncing, just so you know, as a female, your body follows a monthly hormonal rhythm. And it's not a daily flat pattern, right? You have estrogen levels that fluctuate, progesterone levels that fluctuate throughout the month. Because of these changing and these are normal changes that you should have, those hormonal changes affect our metabolic speed, our immune response, our stress response system. It affects our brain chemistry. It affects everything. In the first half of your cycle, you, for example, have more energy. You're more outgoing. In the second half, you might be a little lower energy, but you're more calm and focused if you have adequate levels of progesterone, and you're definitely more naturally introverted, right? So when you understand that there's normal ways for you to be different in different phases, then it does become very illogical to like try to have a habit of self-care that's the same day in and day out, right? So the same calories every day doesn't make sense when you understand you have this infradian rhythm that's governing this menstrual cycle. The same workouts don't make sense based on where you are in the cycle. The same work schedule doesn't even make sense. The same wake-up time doesn't actually make sense. And we have research that shows that, in fact, this is all true. It creates, trying to do the same self-care habits day in and day out creates a mismatch between what's going on in your body and those inputs, right? Again, we're trying to get our inputs right. So yes, you got to balance your blood sugar every day, but you also need to layer in, well, if I'm in the first half of my cycle, yeah, I'm still going to eat for blood sugar balance, but I actually won't need to eat as much because my metabolism is slower. But in the second half of my cycle, which I'm just entering now, I have to increase my caloric intake to keep my blood sugar stable. That's just a fact. So what is the value in me trying to be good and keep the same diet that I had last week when my internal ecosystem has totally shifted based on my cycle phase? It's not good. It's not sustainable. And it creates symptoms. So when you start aligning your food, your fitness, duration and intensity, and even what you're focusing on from a work perspective, your social life, you really reduce in a very constant and holistic way any unnecessary stress that could disrupt your endocrine system and your cyclical hormones. And that is a major lever. So cycle syncing is a huge set of support for women in their reproductive years, because when you stop fighting your body's rhythm, it starts doing its job, right? But there's one more final foundation to the FLO protocol. Because hormones are not just affected by blood sugar. They're not just affected by cortisol. They're not just affected by your gut. They're not just affected by your cycle phases. They're also affected by, how you live. And this is what I refer to as the fifth step of the FLO protocol, where we are engaging, using, leaning into our feminine energy. What do I mean by that? I am the least woo-woo person you will ever meet. In fact, I usually kind of find that stuff to be a little cringy. I love science, as you know from listening to my show. And when I was asking myself at 25, like, what does it mean to live in a way that is just so foundationally supportive to my female ecosystem? Where did I look to get the answer? Well, I looked at our biology, right? So the infradian rhythm and the cycle syncing method was one layer of that. But then I went one layer deeper. I said, well, what if you don't have a cycle? What about menopause? How do we still align with our feminine energy? What is the molecular basis of our feminine energy? And so I looked to the endocrine system. I looked to this really interesting set of hormones that we have. And there are three: melatonin, nitric oxide, and oxytocin. Why do I want you to know about those? And why does this have anything to do with your feminine energy? Well, in my mind, these three hormones really are the basis of what we as women need to lean into more to support our endocrine system as a whole. And we don't talk about it enough. Melatonin is about deep rest. The body can only make this hormone in complete darkness when you are asleep. Very interesting. Oftentimes in more woo-woo conversations, you'll hear feminine energy referred to as the fertile void. I think maybe that's probably based on the reality of how melatonin is made, right? In darkness, out of your rest, out of doing nothing, melatonin can rise in serum concentration. That's a powerful signal to what is essential for us as women to stay healthy is rest. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I mentioned nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is produced during pleasure, right? And eating certain vegetables and all those kind of fun things. But it is talking about the fact that it is important for you to have a life not just built, on occasional moments of sexy time with yourself or your partner, but really doing things that make you feel good, right? And what would happen if you made choices that always had that as your center point? Like, does this make me feel good? I teach my daughter this all the time. She's going on 12 in October. And we were just talking about this yesterday. I said, you're at the stage of life where you have to start making decisions about saying yes to things that feel good and saying no to things that don't light you up. Marie Kondo talks about this as things that spark joy. How do you live your life in a way that sparks more joy because it's good for your health, right? And the body is telling us that this hormone, because the more nitric oxide you make, the more protected your heart is. Heart disease is the number one killer of women. I want you to live a long time. We also know that it has impacts on our ovarian health. So choosing a more pleasure-oriented life, and I'm not talking about just sex here, I'm talking about just things that light you up, living in a way that makes you feel good. That's germane to your health and your longevity as a woman. So again, there's a basis for this in the female body. We don't have to have it be woo-woo. We can trust the roadmap our body is giving us. And there's one more I mentioned, which is oxytocin. Oxytocin is produced during breastfeeding, when you're giving hugs. If we take the 10,000-foot view about what is this molecule telling us about how to live as a woman, it's telling us that community is important to our health. You know, when we look at the female stress response compared to men have the typical fight or flight stress response. Women have something called tend and befriend, right? For example, I was very stressed about my hormonal problems as a young woman. And I then decided that the way that I was going to deal with that stress was tending to myself and then helping other women. That's a classic tend and befriend reaction to a stressful experience, right? You have this all the time, but it also is because when I help other women, I get a huge surge of oxytocin. Just talking to you right now is good for my oxytocin levels, right? And it is a way for us to feel confident that our female ecosystem is giving us a perfect map, right? From our cycles to these special molecules that I just talked about of how to live optimally as a woman, not just simply to keep symptoms at bay, but to really thrive. And this becomes very critical, like how fast your hormones age really is dependent on the degree to which you manage this process and lean into your feminine energy, right? Feminine energy, rest, pleasure, connection, community. It regulates your nervous system. It supports your hormonal health. It slows down hormonal aging. It protects the ovary. It pays long-term dividends. And the body is so smart. The female body is so efficient. And it shows us exactly, when we look at the map of our cycle and when we look at these hormones, exactly how to live in a way that optimizes our health. I hope that gives you a clear sense as to why, quote unquote, balancing your hormones is a little silly and not worth your time, but why managing your inputs, your endocrine system inputs, and supporting your feminine ecosystem as a whole is really the goal. That should be what you focus on, not on these short-term, quick fixes. So, if this episode gave you a completely different way of thinking about your hormones, I really want you to share this with somebody that you know is dealing with hormone problems. We all have to help each other to shift this conversation. So many women are stuck in a cycle of unnecessary suffering and throwing money at products and things that are not actually going to help them. And it's based on this lack of understanding of how our bodies work. And I hope today that I cleared up a lot of that confusion. The more we change this conversation, the more we can have women getting out of frustration, getting into clarity, and getting free of unnecessary symptoms. Make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss the next episode, because we're going to keep building on this conversation and helping you understand what moves the needle, how your body works, and how it can work. What are the self-care things you really need to be doing to support your longevity as a female, and what are the things you don't have to waste your time with. If this resonated with you, I would love it if you would leave a review. It helps me and it helps other women find more information to help them on their journey. Until I see you next time, take really good care of your ovaries.